Next week, we are going to have a longer session. So I'm going to make sure everybody knows about it. And we're going to do that assignment together, that big family resource list. If you're interested, it is on page 16. And it's a family resources guide. And it has websites and agencies and translation services, family counseling, all things you're supposed to be able to provide to families. And rather than you all trying to look this stuff up, we'll all do it together and write it up together. And then there's other things in here that you need to have documented, like the regulation of child care centers and family child care home names, early childhood associations, summaries of legal requirements, all sorts of fun stuff. Okay. Let's do program management. And Janet was the co-producer of this presentation. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Super.
Yes.
All right, here we go. Program management. So today we're going to talk about collecting information and observing children for assessment. So assessment is essentially collecting information to learn about the children, where they are. And then using observations to drive your lesson planning. So using that assessment to figure out what to teach next. All right. Why assess? So this is pulled directly from your textbook, this section here. And remember, assessment, other words that are similar to it are testing, but it's not really testing, but it's like trying to figure out what you know. So assessment, the reason you want to figure out what children know is so that you can support their learning and development. So if you have no idea where they are developmentally, you can't support them in getting to the next phase. You also want to figure out where they are to screen the children for special needs. So remember, we talked a lot about that developmental milestones chart. And after the children pass out of that developmental window for certain things, you need to let the families know so that they can talk to their pediatrician to see if there's something that can be done to help the child. To evaluate program effectiveness. Can anybody give me an interpretation of what that might mean? To evaluate program effectiveness. We're talking about assessment, and the question is, how can assessment of children help you evaluate the program effectiveness? So it's bullet point number 3.
How well they're learning and what point they're at.
So figuring out where the children are at, how does that help you figure out how you're doing as a teacher?
The progression.
So if everybody's below where they should be, does that tell you you're doing an awesome job of teaching?
No.
Probably not, right? Or at least it lets you know that, if I assess all these children and I find out that their gross motor skills are at or above where they need to be, but their fine motor skills are really below where they need to be, and I teach all my lessons about gross motor, that tells you you need to change your program, right? To address what they need.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
See? No?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. To monitor trends and needs. So same thing, if you notice after you assess the development of all the children in your classroom, that most of them need extra support with vocabulary, or extra support with naming their emotions. That helps you discover what you need to teach. And this follows with assessing how they're developing to hold programs accountable. This is a big deal, especially for elementary school teachers, right? Because they have their tests that they have to do in their classroom or figure out where all the children are developmentally. And then that affects sometimes how their pay is done, right? So if all your children are below grade level, it's not good for you. And then to advance your knowledge of child development. If you're trying to figure out what children learn, you have to yourself figure out what is supposed to be happening with these children. You have to do your own homework. If you want to figure out, are my children developmentally where they need to be in gross motor, you yourself have to learn, well, what is developmental for this age group? Does anybody have any questions on this slide? I know it's a lot. I'm gonna give wait time.
No.
No.
No? All right. Authentic assessment. Has anybody ever heard this term before?
Authentic? Yeah, I heard the word.
They throw it around a lot in trainings. You're supposed to be authentic. Kind of what does the word authentic mean to you when something's authentic?
Like, kind of like, how do I say it? It's like when they say, oh, this person's authentic.
So what are they saying about that person?
Like, it's valuable?
Say again?
Valuable?
Valuable? Okay. Anybody else have something to add to that? Tawana?
No.
I think we lost Tawana.
No, you didn't. I'm here.
Okay. So
Add them.
authentic in this meaning is that the person is acting like themselves. They're being them. They're not putting on a front. So if assessment is authentic, it means it's something that represents what the child normally does. Not something that you train the child up special to do just for a test. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So in order for it to be authentic, in order for it to represent who the child really is and what they normally do, it needs to be systematically collected. Systematically means that you can't just choose to assess a child when they're throwing a tantrum in the middle of the floor and this is the only tantrum they've thrown all week. It needs to be when they're acting normally. In your book, in your textbook, it also says to be systematic, you need to be unbiased. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on the news right now about bias in America. And when you live as a living human being, you can't help but be biased based on your personal experiences, what you've seen, what you've heard, what has happened to you. But if you'll look at page 485, and I'll pull it up just in case you can't look at 485 right now. There are ways you can reduce your bias when you're collecting information about a child. So if you are recording what the child is doing, assessing them authentically, if you're recording what they normally do, and you're writing it down, there are certain words that can influence how somebody reading it would think about that child. And some of those words are that child is lonely. That child's bossy, mean, sloppy, selfish, petty, amazing, lazy, aggressive, smart, shy, needy, intelligent, pretty. So not all of these words that can influence think about a child are necessarily bad, right? So if you call a child kind and artistic, that normally isn't considered bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, right?
No.
But if you write up something about that child saying, oh, that child's so kind and artistic, it doesn't really tell you anything specific about the child. It's kind of like when you say good job, right? It doesn't tell the child what they did a good job for. It's just empty praise. So instead of writing that the child was kind and artistic, you might write, oh, the child had 2 toys, and when their friend came to block area, they handed 1 toy to them. That's specific, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to say kind, you just write what actually happened. Other things that the words that you would avoid on here are not nice words to share about a child. So saying a child's aggressive, or saying the child is bossy. Those aren't words that indicate that the child is pleasant. Instead, you would write what actually happened. So if you think the child is bossy, write exactly what they did that you thought was bossy instead. So when we were playing outside today, Abigail told everybody what part of the playground they should play in. Instead of saying bossy, you're being specific and saying what Abigail specifically did. And then later on, if you read through it, you could say, wow, Abigail was taking initiative, or Abigail was speaking out and using her vocabulary at a high level. Does that make sense why you would want to avoid those non-specific words that don't tell you anything?
Yeah.
Okay. So, like I was saying, there's no way that you can avoid your bias, but you can reduce it by being specific in what you write down instead of using these words that don't really tell you about the child, but still lead to an opinion. All right. Another part of authentic assessment is doing it in natural settings. So you may have noticed at one time or another, has anybody ever had somebody come into their center and do an eyesight test?
Nope.
No? Okay. Well, in that case, that's a bad example. Let's see. Has anybody ever had anybody come in and test any of your children for anything?
Lillian, perhaps they've been observed during class.
Okay. How about y'all? Has anybody come in and observed you as a teacher?
Well, we had small assessments done on some of the children because of the school program.
Tell me about that, Tawana.
Some of the children that we have are from a United Way program. And so one of the directors from there had a small assessment that we would do on the children that were from that center.
Okay, and when you did that assessment, was it an assessment that you needed to pull the child out of the classroom and work with them by themselves?
No, not necessarily. It had a list of things that we should see if they were able to do. And she basically just kind of ran them off, and we checked them off, like if we noticed that children have done that before or things that we've seen them do.
So you didn't set up, so just off the top of your head, what was one of the skills that you needed to look for?
Um, like it was like ages and stages type things of like grasping and standing on balancing on one foot for 3 to 5 seconds or whatever, depending on what age group it was for.
Okay. So for the grasping, did you just watch the child do it, or did you try to set up something so that they would do it in front of you?
No, she would come every now and then. So it was like more or less like, have you seen them do this before? And you just say yes or no.
Okay. That sounds to me like it's more of an authentic one. So when it's authentic, it needs to happen during the child's normal play and routines.
Yes.
Okay.
Basically.
The ones that are not authentic, so I was trying to share with you originally about the eye exam, they go in a separate classroom. They usually set up an eye chart on the wall and get one child at a time to come in and, point which way rabbit ears are facing on a chart. And it tells them what they need to know, but it doesn't really get at all their developmental things. So for authentic, it needs to happen in their classroom or on their playground during a normal day. During daily routines. So if you have something special happening, so let's say today is the day that you all are taking the field trip that you get to go on each year. It's not a good time to do an assessment because the children are very excited about something new and you're going to get different behavior than you would normally get. Does anybody have a question about what counts as authentic assessment? Okay.
So Lillian, also, can I tell them that when they get their verification visit from their PLS, they're gonna come and they'll be able to pick the time and the setting, and it'll just be a visit in their authentic assessment. They'll just look and watch and observe what they're doing. It could be lunchtime, it could be outdoors, anytime, but they're just gonna come and sit and observe and take notes and watch them doing what they do every day. So that's an example of an authentic assessment for them.
Yep, you're not going to be putting on a show. It's just do what you normally do to the best of your ability, and people will come and try to not bother you and sit in the corner of the room and watch what you're doing. Okay. Thank you, Stacy. All right, so on page 478 and 480. All right, so turn please to page 478. And this goes through to page 480. And what we're going to talk about now and make a list is what would you like to learn about the children in your classroom? It's the purpose of the observation, right? So in page 478 to 480, they have a long list of things or reasons you might want to observe in your classroom. So looking at this list and using your own thoughts about when you're in the classroom, what are some things that you would like to assess or observe and figure out about your classroom or specific children in your classroom? I'm ready to type. So I have started here. What triggers a child's problem behavior? So if you have a child that's acting out for some reason, trying to figure out what happens directly before that to cause the behavior. The second example here is, what are my children interested in? Because one of the things that we should be doing in a classroom is teaching lessons that include what children are interested in. So looking at this list, what kinds of things would you observe for in your classroom?
I saw one that says, how does this child interact with peers?
Okay. And why would you be looking for that?
So I just you can observe if they're like a bully, not a bully, but if they know how to share with others.
Checking out their social skills.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
Okay.
I guess how does a child solve problems?
All right. And why might you be checking a child out for that?
I guess checking the I don't want to say a thought process, but I guess how well they help themselves.
All right. I'm trying to think of it.
I don't know how else to say. I don't know how to describe what I'm thinking.
It works. Looking at this list, when I was in a 2-year-old classroom, I can tell you one that I would have needed to assess is how are nap times working?
I was thinking about that too, but I was like, they never work in my classrooms because they're so young.
Mm-hmm.
And everything's on will.
All right. Does anything else call to y'all? We'll get one more on here and then go back.
What about how does the child communicate?
And that would be good for figuring out a couple different things about the child. What do you think might be a good focus for that one?
Like if they talk Spanish only or
Okay.
they don't talk at all.
So let's see, what percentage? You can also figure out vocabulary. You also mentioned if it's verbal, nonverbal.
Yeah, not verbal.
Okay, I think that's a good start. All right. So, observation samples. And in your book, they have a lot of different ways that you can observe listed out. Let's see if I can find what page precisely that's on. Page 484 and 485, they actually have a table about the different kinds of observation. The first one that is very common is an anecdote. Anecdote is that you have observed something happening in the classroom, usually while you're playing with the children, and you jot down what happened quickly. And usually has a date on it, usually has the children's names that are involved. And you would save that and use it to figure out where the children are developmentally from that. The next one that we have here that Janet in particular thought was really good was the diary and journal observations. And that is if there's one particular child, so using the example Nikki gave about a child's communication skills, this is description of the child over time. So you could figure out, okay, when it's lunchtime and the children are all talking to each other, what kind of speech quality or language or verbal, nonverbal is this child doing over time? Let's see, event samples. So if you're trying to figure out how many children are using your library area during free choice, that would be a good way for you to just have a tally sheet next to you, and every time you see a child go in library area, you just make a mark. And then the rating scale. could be something pulled from developmental milestones, but it's something that's pre-made. A rating scale that you would currently use as a teacher could be like your Texas Rising Star classroom assessment that tells you, oh, if you do this much time outside each day, you get a 1. If you do more time, you get a 2. If you do an hour, then you get a 3 type thing. Okay, and now we're gonna take a look. So if you have keep your book with you, looking at 484 and 485, let's look at some examples here. So we have an example here of an anecdote. So this was done on a sticky note. I am a huge fan of sticky notes for almost everything. These are nice though, because you can have the pad of sticky notes in your pocket with a pen. And as you're playing with children, you can just pull it out, write it down, and stick it up high on the wall if you want for you to get later, or put it at the bottom of the pad. And here's an anecdote taken about Laura. I put on here that Laura is 20 months old. It says she's using her whole hand to hold the chunky paintbrush. She's controlling the brush to paint lines on the paper taped to the table. All right, so what makes this authentic? Just based off what we know about authentic, what do you think makes this authentic?
Because they're being specific and not just saying, oh, she's real creative.
She's artistic.
Yeah.
Right. So it's being really specific. What else? All right. Think about where it was done, or what the activity was. Was it something that's done that's special just for that one time?
No.
No.
Okay.
How about skills from the 5 motor skills?
Okay. So you're definitely finding out information about Laura in this anecdote. Definitely. You're finding out about her fine motor skills. She's 20 months old, so that's very specific. If you have a class of children that range from, I don't know, 12 months to 18, 24 months, there's a lot of growth during that time, and it's good to know where your children are specifically. So this one, you're finding out about her fine motor skills. All right, awesome. Is there anything else you can learn about this particular anecdote before we move on to the next one? Okay. Here is an example of how one teacher saves their anecdotal notes for one specific child. So they did a sticky note method, but then to save it in the child's portfolio, remember we talked about the portfolio being a file or a notebook about a specific child? So to save it for that particular child's portfolio, they went and they put all of them on a piece of paper, and they made sure they put the dates that they took the notes and the child, so that they can see what happens over a period of time. All right. Here is one little observation. Just one all by itself. And it said on May 1st at 8:20 a.m., DT pushed AR as the class was lining up to wash hands. From this one little anecdote, is there anything you can learn about DT?
That he's mean.
What was that, Nikki?
That he's mean.
Okay. So that goes under the bias thing, right?
Yeah.
So you can't use mean
Okay.
because that leads you to think a specific way about the child rather than describing what's going on. Do we know why DT pushed AR?
No.
We have no idea. It's possible AR pushed him first, or heaven knows what happened. So just from this one little anecdote, it doesn't tell you very much. But what happens if we have a diary from May 1st? Let's look at the rest of them. So at 8:20, DT pushed AR when they were lining up. At 8:30, DT pushed KB as they grouped around the table to see what was for breakfast. At 9 o'clock, DT pushed AR as they raced to get to the crazy coop that was outside. At 9:05, DT pinched AR as AR opened the door to the crazy coop that DT was sitting in. At 9:45, DT cried when AR beats him to the door to go inside. The teacher intervenes and steps between the children. At 10:30, DT and AR play alongside each other for 15 minutes. Each child has a toy dumpster in the block area. This is a lot of information now. So looking at, and this is only for a couple hours. So over this couple hours, is there anything that just jumps out at you?
I guess when the teacher intervenes,
What about the teacher intervening?
because after she intervened, he started playing good with the other kids.
Okay, and did anybody
It's
get
also
hurt
like-
on that one when the teachers stepped between them? You didn't, it wasn't written down if they did, was it?
No.
No.
Looking at this, is there any kind of pattern you can see to when DT is acting out? So let's see, the first time DT acted out was when they were lining up. The second time is when they were grouped together. The third time was when he and another child were trying to get to one specific toy. The third time was when DT was sitting in the toy and somebody came up close to it to try to get in. The fourth time was when the children were running to get to the door and they're grouping together.
So I guess during group time.
So it seems to me that whenever the kids flock together in a huddle, DT pushes somebody away from him or her. Does that make sense based on what we're seeing here?
Yeah.
And we also know two of the incidents happened because there was one cozy coop outside and two children wanted it, right? What happened later on when there were two toys that the children had that they could both play with one?
They played alongside each other.
Was there any accident then or any incident?
No.
No. No.
So what does that tell the teacher they need to do for outside?
She has to double toys.
They need to have at least two of those cozy coops, or they need to put up the just one that they have. Because that's a high valued toy and there's only one of them, and you can't do that with toddlers. What do you think the teacher could do to support DT? or to change up their classroom so that the kids aren't huddling up together with DT. So based on this, if this is happening frequently, you can expect every day, every time they line up to wash hands, that DT is going to want to have his own space or have her own space. And you know when they group see what was for breakfast, that DT is also going to try to get their own space again. So what could you as the teacher do to help this situation?
I don't know if it's chicken, send him before everybody.
Okay, so DT could go first, right, before you get the other kids grouped together. That's definitely something you could do. Anything else jump out at folks as another thing you could try? There's really no wrong answer here unless you do something just wretched to DT. But definitely trying that child first would make it so that they don't have a bench of other children pushing and getting in their personal space. You could try different ways of releasing children to wash their hands. Maybe you don't have the whole group line up at one time to wait. Remember, we talked about how to make your wait times engaging. Maybe it's trying to figure out a more amusing transition so that they're not laser focused in on getting their hands washed, but they can appreciate interacting with the teacher while they're waiting. And then figuring out how to get them to the table without them all clumping together would be good as well. Okay, so that shows you what a diary or a journal observation can do for you. If you just have the one entry, it doesn't tell you much. Like Nikki was saying, it just tells you, well, maybe this kid has some sort of emotional issue. But if you see what happens over a period of time and the scenarios surrounding it, a lot of this can be mediated by the teacher. That cozy coop thing, definitely fixable by the teacher. The lining up to wash hands, definitely fixable by the teacher. So maybe it's not an issue with DT, maybe it's an issue with how the classroom's being run and how that child can be supported.
Lillian, if I can add something too.
Okay.
The other thing, looking at this, I would also watch what's happening more frequently between DT and AR, because there's definitely a pattern between those two children. The other thing I want to mention, one of the ways y'all talked about using assessment was on challenging children. And having taught many challenging children, classrooms full of them, this type of observation was very meaningful to families too. That I, and again, I didn't say DT was mean. I said, I could just show them this is what's happening in the classroom. This is what I'm doing to try to help DT, but this is his pattern of behavior type thing. So, I know it's difficult to do all the time, but I thoroughly use this practice when I was trying to get information about specific behavior of children. So, thank you.
I did put the AR in thing specifically for that, but there are a couple reasons it could be in there, right? It could be that DT and AR are really similar, have very similar interest, and they both are very competitive and want to be first at something. They like the same toys. Or it could be that DT in particular likes to be near AR for whatever reason that is. So it's good to know. And this is the kind of thing that leads a parent. So you're not sharing this information out with all your families, right? But if AR's parent comes to you and says, DT is bullying my child, and you're like, no way. If you observe over time and see that AR is getting the majority of incidents, then trying to be very specific in how you intervene to help support AR so that they're not taking all of this from one particular child. Okay. And here is an event sample that goes to the nap time scenario. So on June 3rd, 2020, between the times of 11:15 and 11:45, I decided to mark down how many children were getting off their cot, or how many times each child got off their cot. Because I usually go on my lunch break at this time, and my assistant teacher that's in there said, I can't handle these children. They're all running around. I can't get anybody to stay on their cot. So I decided to go in and get actual information about what was going on. What can I learn from the information I took?
Who is not able to sleep?
Okay. So based on the number of tally marks, which child is off their cot the most?
Lily.
Yeah, that's probably would have been accurate for me. Which child do you have to worry about the least?
Eva.
Ava. Ava stayed on her cot. Yay, Ava. Now, some other information that might be helpful to you is to have a nap chart to figure out where these children are located, right? So if Lily's on one side of the room and Mike is on the other side of the room, what is the poor teacher trying to do? Run back and forth, right?
Yeah.
Back and forward, yeah.
It's back to the whack-a-mole scenario. Lay Lily down, get up, run over, lay Mike down. Get up,
And
run
when she
back
comes the
over.
other way, yeah.
And as you're doing that, maybe Evan is on the other corner of the room and is taking advantage of the teacher being preoccupied going back and forth and is like, you know what? I think I can make a break for the block area right now. I'm going for it. So if you had this information, what kinds of things could you try to change?
Okay, I had some experience in the past when I was assisting the teacher. Actually with me, I put it the child I know they don't sleep easy. So I put it all the children away, they can sleep by themselves. And the other ones, I sit down between them and pat them until they sleep. So I think that's easy that way because you know you have to work with them. And the other ones, they can sleep by themselves. So I put it away from everybody to you don't bother them, they can sleep, and I stay with the children, they don't sleep.
Mm-hmm. So based off of this chart, if you had to choose 3 children that were going to sit next to the teacher, which ones would it be? Or lay next to the teacher? Which 3 children need to be near the teacher for nap time?
Lily, Mike, and Evan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I would probably have somebody else or yourself, depending on how that works for you. If the interventions that you tried of moving the children and being next to them isn't working, come back in and take the numbers again and figure out, okay, so I've got these 3 children, now the other ones are popping up. Then maybe you have a different problem. Maybe you have to change something about the activity level of the children before it's time to take a nap. Maybe you need to change something about how the lights in the classroom or the sound, but it's good to gather the information so that you can make informed choices. All right. So using what we know, here's our first scenario. The assistant teacher is having a difficult time settling the children for nap time. And I thought this picture was very appropriate. That's how they look to me when they're jumping on their cot. She feels like everyone keeps popping off their cot and they only get a short nap. Which observation method would be best to understand what's actually happening? So we have the choice of A, who is getting off their cot? B is the one we just saw, right? How many children leave their cot during that time? And C is a diary. You're describing, like Lily, describing how one child is doing during nap time every day for a week to figure out what's causing it. And there's no wrong answer here, by the way. And I'm wondering if I can set up the chat here so you can put it in there if you're not feeling it. Let's see, how do I do a chat? Polls, more remote chat. Whoops. All right, we've got the chat going. Feel free to put if you would prefer A, B, or C. Oh, there we go, thank you. So we have 2 A's and a C. All right, so we said there's no wrong answer. If you have A, you're going to learn out of this group of children who is getting off their cot. If you have C, you're watching one particular child to figure out is that particular child getting off their cot. And if you chose B, you're figuring out how many times they left their cot, which is, one minute, this. So if you did A of who got off their cot, looking at this tally mark, out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 children, how many children would you have that got off their cot?
Three.
I'm sorry?
One. I don't get the question.
Okay, let me try again. You have 8 children in your classroom.
Mm-hmm.
If you chose to record which children got off of their cot, based on this information, how many of the 8 children got off their cot?
Oh, okay. So 7 of them?
Mm-hmm. So you would learn that in this classroom during nap time, all but one of the children are getting off their cot. Okay, not bad information to know. Yes. I'm sorry, I thought I heard somebody else. Okay. And then if you were doing C, you might be hopefully watching either Lily, Mike, or Evan to figure out why they're getting off their cot. Because of the number of times we know children are moving around in this classroom during nap time, it'd probably be good to have somebody come in and support you to gather this information, if possible. All right, let's try the next one. The teacher is blocks with 2 children. Jose stacks 6 blocks vertically and says, "I'm building a tower." Max lines his blocks up on the floor. So, looking at page 484 and 485, which observation method would you use to document this? I'll give you a few minutes to think about it. Now, if nobody comes up with anything, I'll give you a couple different options to choose from.
I don't know if it would be brief notes.
Brief notes?
Yeah.
Sure.
I was looking
It
at-
says these quick entries provide data on a child's interest or progress. And you jot down a short note on an index card, a sticky note, date the entry for easy access. You can keep it on a clipboard and a pen. Sure, that'll work.
Oh, so then I was also looking at that event sampling too.
You are also looking at event sampling, which is The observer documents the number of times a child engages in a particular behavior during a specific period of time. That might be a little specific for this because
Oh,
you're
okay.
going to take tally marks
Oh, okay.
of how many blocks that are going vertical. You could.
Yeah.
Another one you could do is anecdotal reference, and that's very similar to the brief notes. And that is recording the child's comments too, so you could put the "I'm building a tower" in there. So what can you as a teacher have ready, or how can you be ready to take notes as you're walking around the classroom and playing with children? What can you do to be prepared to take notes? You're not going to have a clipboard hanging around your neck, probably. You might.
With the sticky notes?
Yeah, I just have sticky notes.
Sticky notes in a pocket, sure. Does anybody have to wear an apron for their job?
No.
No?
No, we wear scrubs, and I usually have ones with pockets in the front or the side, cargo.
I've had teachers that like those half aprons, like from Home Depot or something, that have the pockets in the front, that you just put around your waist. That's something else you could do. But you need something to write with and you need something to write on. So just to be ready. I've also seen teachers keep writing materials in all the areas of their classroom. So maybe on top of the shelf you have a little pad of paper or a clipboard with the pen on it that when you see something cool, you just snatch it down, write on it, and put it back up on the shelf. Whatever works for you so that you do take notes is best. All right, this is the cycle of curriculum planning from your textbook. Observe and document. So that's what we've been talking about. Figuring out what the children know and what they do is a really good first step. Then you use that information to figure out what's happening, evaluate. So you could evaluate to say, these are the children that are getting up a lot during nap time. Okay. Then your plan. Sylvia came up with the plan for nap time based on knowing that these are the children that get up a lot during nap time. We're going to make a plan for how to solve that problem. We're going to change up where the children sleep. Implement is actually doing it. You've made the plan, now try it out. After you've tried it out, then you have to observe, did anything change? Did it make an impact? What happened? And so that's why it's a circle. So maybe you implement it and you figure out, now there's only one child that's getting up. All right, let's observe and document. Maybe we try to figure out why that child's getting up when they're getting up. And then we interpret it, we evaluate it, then we make a new plan, try it out, and that's why it's a cycle. You can't see my hand gesturing in a circle, but it's happening. Does anybody have a question about the circle?
No, it's very specific. We need to ask this. Yes.
It makes sense, right? You have information, figure out what it means, make a plan, try it out, and see what changes. That's like scientific method-y kind of stuff. Problem solving. Okay. I'm trying to move. It's not clicking. There we go. All right. So now we're going to use an anecdote to figure out where this child is developmentally. Remember this anecdote? Laura is 20 months old. She's using her whole hand. What do we remember what kind of grasp this is called? Trick question. Palmer.
Oh, I
her a gold star.
I winged it. I didn't even know.
All right. So Palmer grass, Lauda is 20 months old. She's using a Palmer grass to hold her chunky paintbrush. She's controlling but even though she has her whole hand, she's controlling it, which is hard to do, right? When you're using your whole hand. She's controlling the paintbrush. She's making lines on the paper. The paper is taped to the table. All right, so let's try to figure out where this kid is developmentally. Somebody mentioned when we looked at it the first time that it might be a fine motor area. Do you all agree?
Yes.
All right, so let's look on Little Texans Big Futures to see where this child might be falling. All right, based on that, how many months old was Lauda? Where is she here?
She's 18 to 26.
36 months.
Excellent. So she's 20 months, right? So if this is for 18 to 36, is she going to be at the beginning of this or is she going to be towards the end? Is she going to be at the beginning of this period of time or towards the end? Which is 20 closer to, 18 or 36?
Yeah, 18. So she's in the beginning?
Yep, she's going to be closer to the beginning. So she's just coming out of this one. She's just coming out of the 8 to 18, and she's now in the 18 to 36. Let me go into physical development. We're already there. Wonderful. Let's look in fine motor and see what we've got. Build a small tower. Fit objects together, dig in sand, tear paper, put on clothing, play with and complete simple puzzles. That doesn't much, does it? Let me look in gross motor and see if there's anything in there. No, so I think you were correct in that it's fine motor. I'm going to also look in what you can do to support your child and see if there's anything there. I'm seeing a couple things here that might be helpful to us. Hand-eye coordination things, and delicate movements, right?
Yeah.
And just for giggles, I'm going to take a look at 8 to 18 months and see what's there for fine motor. Bang toys together, scoop and rake, use a thumb and index finger to pick up, squeeze, and poke small items. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Why is that interesting?
Because she's supposed to be already in the stage. She's just using the fingers to pick it up, to grab this brush. Why not the whole thing? Because I think she's a little behind. That is a stage.
Okay, so do you see why it was helpful for us to go down to check? Because we didn't find anything specific in the 18 to 36.
Yeah.
But we did mention that she was at the beginning of it and just coming out of this other one. So when we went back to the developmental stage before, we did find something that tells us something about this child. We know that this child should be able to use her thumb and index finger for a grip now, right? Mm-hmm. And we noticed that she was using her whole hand. Now, based on that information, Sylvia said she might be a little behind with her grip. All right. So information we've learned based on Little Texans Big Futures. What has she not yet achieved? Sylvia said it already.
It's hand coordination.
All right. So that's something we need to work on with their grip, right? Would you agree that's something we need to help develop for this child?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to make this red so it stands out for us. So you know this child needs to learn a different kind of grip. And you know that using the chunky paintbrush that you have out and taping the paper to the table, she's able to use it really, really well without any kind of, it's too easy for her almost, right? It's painted to the table. She's able to make controlled lines, which is very difficult for a young child. So she is just knocking this on its butt, the way it's currently held out for her. What are some options you could have to make it more difficult to move her forward?
Lacing cars. You can practice with lacing cars to
You could.
put in the little hole with the fingers.
All right. Is there anything you could do with the paintbrush? So right now you have a chunky
How about
paintbrush.
Or then
Paintbrush?
Okay, I heard somebody say a thinner paintbrush.
Oh, the same difference. If that makes any sense.
Is there anything you could do with
Also, you
paper
can.
to make it more difficult?
How about she can use the clothespin to press with the cotton to paint? The clothespin.
Clothespins painting? Okay.
Yes, with the cotton.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything about the paper? So the paper right now is taped to the table. Is there anything we can do to make that where she has to work a little more deliberately?
Without the tape?
Say again?
Without the tape?
Okay, that would make it harder, wouldn't it? She'd have to use both hands and focus in a bit more, right?
To hold it down.
And I heard some other examples, the lacing cards to develop fine motor skills, the pinching. So trying to put out things that will make her, so smaller objects, right, that she's able to pick up. Why do you need to be careful using small objects with her age?
It's a hazard.
Choking hazard. And it just keeps going until 3 years old. I'm sorry, y'all. So you have to be very deliberate in what you put out that it's not a choking hazard. Sylvia got around that with her suggestion of the lacing cards. Very smart. The clothespins, have to watch out and see what is possible for that. But yeah, lots of fine motor. If you Google fine motor development for toddlers, there's lots of options out there. All right. Well done, y'all. And you've made it through. Congratulations. All right. So for next week, I'd mentioned to Nikki and I think Tawana already, we are going to have an extended session because we are going to work together to create our resource page to to put in our binder for families. So you all aren't going to have to look up all that information. We're going to do it together. And I'll send out information about the times for that. So everybody will be aware that that's happening next Saturday.